Welcome to the Peep Show podcast.
Your glance at sex and social justice.
With Jesse and PJ Sage.
Welcome back to another episode of the Peep Show podcast. For today's episode, we have Christina Springer with us to talk about her new book, The Splooge Factory. Her book explores what it is like to work in an erotic massage parlor in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, our hometown.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us again. We have a pretty unique episode for you today. We're going to focus on Pittsburgh.
Yeah, where we live. So we don't get to do that very often, but it's fun for us because I think one of the things that's unique about our podcast is we're not coming from one of the coasts. We are in the Rust Belt in Middle America and
Repping Middle
America, which is funny for me because I'm actually from one of the coasts. But I've been here so long that I might as well be from Pittsburgh.
Are you honorary Yinzer?
I'm an honorary Yinzer. I can't even bring myself to say that, but I love Pittsburgh, actually. And so it's really fun for us to be able to talk about one sector of the sex industry in Pittsburgh. So we're going to be talking to Christina Springer, who just wrote a book of poems told from the voices of several different people who worked in a particular happy endings massage parlor on Carson Street, which is like kind of the party street in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, it's interesting for me in particular. So this is kind of a historical perspective. She's talking about the very early 2000s, and the internet was just taking off. And so that's kind of an interesting part of the story about how sex workers were finding their way on the internet. Mm-hmm. But also for me personally, this was a period of time when I was just graduating high school. And I remember very vividly that there were a number of stings on massage parlors in Pittsburgh at that time.
Oh, really?
And even one that was like right down the street from my high school that people always used to kind of brag about going to.
The high school students did?
Yeah.
Or like the ones who turned 18, or?
I don't know if they carded people at happy ending massage parlors. I just know that there was lots of rumors and that like one of these spas did get shut down. And I grew up in the airport town, and so there was an adult bookstore, and there was a strip club, and there were these spas, and there was, these hotels, which everybody kind of knew were used for prostitution. And the community was like very aware of all this stuff. This was really a moment where, for whatever reason, I think there was a lot of attention to particularly these massage parlors. Mm-hmm. So it's really interesting to revisit that now with somebody who was on the inside and who had like more of an adult perspective on it. Because I just have these kind of faint glimmers of memories and like of all the rumors circulating. But, now having had this history in the adult industry and talking to somebody who, was there at the time, obviously I have a very different perspective. So that was kind of neat to revisit all of that and see it through a different lens.
It's neat to me because this is one sector of the industry that I know relatively nothing about. And so it was interesting to kind of hear how they were run and operated. And also, like, how similar a lot of the work is to, work that we've done in other, like, segments of the industry.
Yeah, absolutely.
It also, we had a couples massage last night, and I was thinking, actually.
I don't know where this is going.
I was thinking, man, if they had, like, happy ending massage parlors that catered to women, I might be totally into that. Because every single time I have a massage, I'm like, what would make this even better is an orgasm.
I didn't actually know if you were going to say, like, giving or receiving in that context.
No, I meant like as a customer. Like, I think I would totally be a customer.
All right. So, entrepreneurs out there.
We need a space for women that could be, like, very relaxing and that could end in orgasms. It'd be nice. It's a total aside that has nothing to do with her interview, but I just thought I would interject. No, and the other thing that we wanted to do is she is the first spoken word poet that we've had on the podcast, and we really wanted to give her space to read some of her poetry.
So we're just going to jump right into the interview, so we have time for all that.
Sounds good. We're here today with Christina Springer. She is an Alt.Black artist who uses text, performance, video, and other visual expressions to communicate what the space between molecules in the air wish for you to know. Most recently, her visual art has been shown at the San Jose Martin Luther King Library, Dayton Visual Arts Center, Greater Pittsburgh Arts Council, and Irma Freeman Center for Imagination. Her most recent theatrical offering, She Diva Died and Come Again, incorporated text, movement, music, and video to explore the challenges and joys of raising a Black man. Cave Cayman shaped her voice. Her book, The Splooge Factory, is forthcoming from Frayed Edge Press in November. So welcome. Thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah,
it's our pleasure.
We're excited to talk about your book.
This is fun. This is the first time we've done like a live interview in our new studio.
I know,
It's a beautiful, beautiful studio.
Well, you are our first guest, so thank you.
Sorry we made you wait while we were setting up the equipment, but I think it's going to be cool. We're here now.
Well, my grandfather used to say, trifles make perfection, but perfection is no trifle.
Oh, that's
I like
good.
Yeah.
I want to go back to your bio a little bit. You say that you're an Alt.Black artist. Can you tell us a little bit about what that means?
Yes, I was thinking about how to define myself, especially in this day and age of identity. And Alt.Black is my way of paying homage to all of the Black experimental artists who kind of existed before Beyonce, before Afro-punk, before Afro-surrealism and futurism, and any of these sort of re-emerging Afro-alternative forms. And I've always been very experimental in my practice. And so that's my way of celebrating all of the people who worked on the fringe, like Adrian Kennedy or Julius Eastman or a band called Death.
Okay.
Right?
I'm taking notes.
Yeah.
Right? I'm taking notes. But also it places me very clearly along the digital continuum. And so it's my way of saying that I was working in a time of moos and muds and BBSs and Usenet news groups.
Yeah.
And before many of our current social media platforms were even thought of.
Yeah.
So it's almost a way of dating myself without actually dating myself.
Yeah, that's actually interesting. It's like an interesting convergence of the old and the new.
Yeah, because we exist in that historical continuum. And I am a more mature artist. And I want to honor that.
Yeah.
And I also really want to honor the fact that we have been creating alternative communities and living outside of the boundaries that mainstream society has insisted are the only real reality for a long, long time. And as a Black person, Black people have also been. And we already almost live on the fringe of white supremacist, heteronormative, patriarchal culture. We do exist on those boundaries, but alternative Black artists are the fringe of the fringe of the fringe.
Yeah.
And that's where my practice exists as an artist.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about your history as an artist.
It's been a wonderful journey. I have been a working artist going on 30 years now.
Wow.
And I've done a little bit of everything. I was working, I've made 16 millimeter films when I was a young person.
Oh,
Cool.
Now you're speaking PJ's language.
And in fact, left film because it took so long to just make a film back then. I mean, I remember I spent 5 years of my life working on one project, trying to tell one story, and I got the funding to tell about 1/3 and some of it. Yeah. And finish it and called it the project. That was a film called Creation of Destiny. But I was always a poet, so I've always done spoken word. I've always done poet. I've been a poet. I've wanted to be a poet.
Yeah.
Since I was 8.
Oh, really?
And that's what I wanted to do more than anything. And back when I was growing up, Pittsburgh had this poetry on the buses thing, and I used to ride the PAT buses to school in the morning and in the afternoon, and sit, and they'd always had these changing poems, these placards on the bus, and I would read the poems, and I would think in my little child heart, I want to be a good enough poet one day to grow up and have a poem on a bus.
Oh.
That's really amazing, actually.
Is that such a good story?
And I actually eventually did end up growing up and having a poem on a bus, because there was an artist who did an installation of Black women poets here in Pittsburgh years ago.
Yeah.
Adrienne Heinlich. And I had a poem on a bus, and I was like, oh my God, I can stop working now because my dreams have been realized.
You're like, I've reached the pinnacle. That's it.
I've done it all. So poetry has always been my fuel, my food as an artist. It's my go-to.
Yeah.
And working so hard in the film community, it got really expensive. And I realized, I got very frustrated, and I was like, well, all I need is a piece of burnt wood and some tree bark, and I can practice my art, and just give me my mouth and a group of people, and we can tell all the stories we want to tell.
Yeah.
So I went careening into spoken word joyfully, and that was at the real beginning of the spoken word movement, when the Poetry Slam was still brand new and fresh and sparkly, and people were slamming sestinas and winning national competitions. And I toured with Lollapalooza as a poet on the third stage. It was crazy.
I didn't know
it was
they
like
had
rock and roll poetry.
That's so interesting. Yeah, I'm learning all these.
I was on the tour with Parliament, Beastie Boys, Smashing Pumpkins. Well, because George Clinton is,
amazing.
An amazing... The end. George Clinton is what the funk is all about.
I saw Parliament in D.C. at the 930 Club, I don't know, like 8 years ago or something, and it had to be one of the best shows I've ever seen in my life. Not just because, musically it was amazing, but the performance was amazing, and the audience was amazing. It was, transcended. The whole event was a show that everybody was part of, and it was one of these things where you went in and it broke down all of the barriers. Everybody is like, oh, you're here to listen to P-Funk, we're best friends now, and it was awesome. It was really such a powerful thing.
And another great Alt.Black artist, George Clinton is within that spectrum of artists who worked on the outside and made what they were doing was so powerful, it crossed.
Yeah, for sure.
Another artist who worked sort of towards the fringe, and then Laurie Anderson is another one of those artists who just sort of stayed true to what they were and who they were and what they were doing. And it crossed into the mainstream. And people were able to have a little delicious snack of something different that we can think about what this genre or this means. Funk changed the world.
Yeah.
Did you do a lot of touring for spoken word stuff?
I did. And I was Pittsburgh's longest reigning slam champion.
Really?
For 5 years. I think
I've watched some of your YouTube videos. That was one of the reasons I was excited to bring you here. But
I go where the spirit says go. So spirit says paint, I paint. Spirit says make some poems, I make poems.
Yeah.
Spirit says make a video.
Yeah.
As I've grown older, my practice has been more confident and less about what I think people would like and more about what pleases me.
Yeah.
Or what I think spirits say do.
Yeah.
That's the nicer thing about getting older, huh?
It is.
Yeah.
It is.
That's really interesting. What do you think has shifted? What underlies that kind of change, that you have that confidence or that drive or that you feel moved in that way?
That is such a great question. I don't know how it works for everybody. And of course, nothing works the same for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, I think there's some combination between late motherhood and menopause. And I turned 50.
Okay.
A minute and 3 years ago. and I have to say, my 50th birthday, am I allowed to use language?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. Oh, obviously, because I'm going to read from my book. I felt like on my 50th birthday, and other women have confirmed that they too have had this sensation. I felt like there was this great lightning bolt that came down and like passed through my body and like burned all the fucks out of me.
Really?
Yes.
You make me want to turn 50. I mean, I actually just recently turned 40. And I felt like that was an amazing thing, too. Like, everybody seemed around me to be really weirded out by it. And I was like, I want to be 40. Like, that sounds so much better to me. I don't know. There was something about growing older that actually is really kind of appealing to me, too. But that's so interesting the way you talked about that.
And I think there are less expectations on us as women as we grow older. Nobody really expects you to look fabulous. Mm-hmm. And so you do it because you feel like it.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
And it suddenly becomes all about you.
Or I think it can be very different, too. Like, I think there's something about the beauty of youth that's very standardized that is more expansive when you're a little older.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I feel much more comfortable in my body now than I did when I was younger. And when I was younger, it was more standard, which there's something strange about that.
I don't know that they're strange, but I think you're onto something. Mm-hmm. And I think for us, like that motherhood turning point.
Yeah.
When you're God for, I don't know how long you were in labor, but for me, it was about 3.5 hours. Yeah. When you're God for like 3.5 hours, you have a whole different relationship to this physical mass of cells and water and minerals and then you're so exposed also, right?
Right.
And then you get this human who has no judgment. And I don't know if it's a real proverb or not, or if it's a quotation, but God is the name of mother on every child's lips.
Oh, that's so nice. Yeah.
Or something like that. Anyway, it's a beautiful idea. That is another shift, a consciousness shift of that you can just be unconditionally loved for no reason whatsoever, or milk.
Well, it's interesting. Before we started rolling, and I'm going to try to incorporate this in. We were talking about how you and I have had a similar experience where we had a kid young and then had one 15 years later. Do you feel like it was different? How was it different in relation to what you were just saying?
I think the idea of not caring as much. Mm-hmm. The first time around, that seed was planted. Mm-hmm. But then again, I was also a very different person. Mm-hmm. And I was a person living to the best of my ability outside of the patriarchy.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And so I was a lesbian mother in a multiracial gay family construct.
Okay.
So we were two women raising a child with a gay man.
Okay.
And who had chosen to have a child.
Yeah.
Right.
So we were sort of the vanguard of the baby boom.
Yeah.
And so we were really kind of out there.
Yeah.
Pretty much in uncharted territory.
Yeah.
I was joking the other day at some event at Persad I remember when Heather Has Two Mommies was black and white. Mm-hmm. I remember when it was a black and white book. And it's now this classic old lesbian children's book standard.
Yeah.
And it was like our shield, when we would go into the schools. Be like, this is our life and this is our kid. You're going to put this in your library.
Yeah.
And so my personal sense of aesthetics were informed largely by a very very feminist lesbian community, and the aesthetics were very different.
Yeah.
So I think that shed for me a lot.
Yeah.
And then when that relationship ended, our co-parent died of AIDS.
Oh, wow.
When my daughter was 7.
Wow.
So then we carried on for another time after that. And then eventually that relationship didn't work out. And I met my husband.
Yeah. Which is a shift, yeah.
Which was a whole different shift.
Yeah.
And it put me in a whole brand new world.
Yeah.
That I had largely avoided the majority of my adult life.
Yeah.
Which was more heterosexual.
Did people start relating to you differently, or?
That was a hard time. That was sort of like a big no-no back then.
Yeah.
Leaving the community.
Mm-hmm.
It was a little utopian, where I had there are whole gaps in movies, music, because I was, in my lesbian.
It's very
world.
like separatist too.
It
like
was fairly separatist, and back then we had our own bookstores and cafes and magazines, and we had our own porn.
Yeah,
we had our own porn.
I mean, there's still lesbian porn, but it's
But this was like conscious, like by women, for women.
Right.
We had, Pat Califia was, brand new. On Our Backs was this like, ooh, fabulous. The first women's porno magazine.
Yeah.
So the aesthetics were different. Mm-hmm. You could live so much more easily outside of the dominant culture.
Right.
And then to sort of slide back in.
Yeah.
And you get acquainted. And
was it difficult for your husband to understand what that transition was like for you? Or was it pretty easy for him to support you through that?
He's a pretty rare human being.
He must be, because you chose him. Huh?
He's a pretty rare human being.
Yeah.
And I believe in my heart of hearts that it is possible for us to relate with each other just soul to soul.
Mm.
And that bodies are important, but I call it a soul conveyance device sometimes. Like I was a little bit sick last year and I was in the hospital and they're like, well, we're going to, you might want to cover up. And I'm like, everybody has the same soul conveyance device.
Yeah.
And so I think I came to him in that way. And I think he is also that kind of person who can be in that place in the future that people are trying to get to.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we can live there with each other.
Yeah.
And also, I mean, it's kind of a fun thing. Everything was brand new.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's not like I was any stranger to anatomy and it wasn't as if I was any stranger to heterosexuality.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that there hadn't been forays into experimentation with that.
Sure. Yeah.
Before him. It was just brand new and deeply intimate.
Mm-hmm.
In the way that I hope. And I don't know that necessarily everybody.
Yeah.
But there is this very naive part of me that walks around thinking that when people are looking for someone to partner with, what they're doing is trying to resonate at the highest frequency with another soul.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think we do that.
I was just having this thought. I was like, oh, I'm so romantic.
This is right on.
Yeah, I am a romantic person, and I'm like, we have a relationship that's like that. But I don't think a lot of people do, and that's always my hope too, is that you can share, like that people find, someone that they can deeply resonate with, and that they can share a part of themselves.
And then what you guys are doing together is working your hardest to make sure that each of you are living your best life.
Right.
And that's the job you have as a couple.
Yeah, right.
Is to lift each other up and build each other and create for yourself.
I think that's countercultural, though. I think you have to fight against the dominant culture to do that.
Yeah.
I'm finding out that I've been finding that out now for the past.
I mean, I think that there's something like I think that most folks, and maybe I should say most straight folks in heteropatriarchy, I think that they think it's their job to kind of contain their partners in some way instead of having this like expansive, like, I want my partner to have their best life.
Well, there's a lot of property rights, and
Right.
which is built right into the patriarchy.
Right.
And
Yeah.
dominance and yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
I think a lot of people have kind of taken up without even thinking about it and reenact a lot of those property sort of frameworks for developing their relationships and their families. And I think there's a different way to do it. You could do it differently.
You know, I agree. And I hate to do this, but that's what surprised me most with the Splooge Factory.
Yeah, so let's talk about your book. Yeah, so the Splooge Factory is your book that you have coming out. Tell us a little bit about that, and then tell us how you're connecting this idea with the book.
Well, I started calling it the Splooge Factory, and it was this little shop down on Carson Avenue that had tanning beds and it was a massage parlor. And the story's in the introduction, so people can buy the book and read the introduction and find out how I ended up there, thanks to my good friend Michelle. I mean, the book goes to a lot of the extreme things that people were talking about on the telephone or working through with the women who worked there.
So you were the receptionist there.
I was.
Yeah, so people will call in to make appointments through you.
Yeah. My friend Michelle did this work. And she was a wonderful coder and really into this emerging technology when I wrote the book.
Okay, yeah.
The internet was an emerging technology.
Yeah.
She was one of the first people, I think, who was contemplating using video to do video conferencing.
Oh, interesting.
And
Okay.
she was setting that. I mean, she was figuring out how to get the bandwidth
Yeah.
and do the coding and connect the cameras. And
Right.
today, anyone who has video conferencing can thank a sex worker. I'm serious.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
the truth.
Yeah.
The first ways we were using this technology on the internet was for sex work.
Yeah.
People do not understand the debt that they owe to sex workers for the conveniences that they take for granted.
Yeah. So tell us. So what was Michelle doing?
So she managed this place for these guys who owned this franchise or whatever. I never asked all that many questions.
Yeah,
it
sure.
was these guys I didn't know
Yeah.
who owned this property and
Yeah.
did this stuff or made sure this stuff could happen.
Yeah. So it was like a massage parlor.
It was a massage parlor,
Yeah.
which had a dungeon in the basement.
Okay.
And yes, it had a full dungeon in the basement.
Yeah.
And she had a receptionist, but she was also on a pager. She also did, at that point, she did out-call work as well.
Yeah. Okay.
And so she and my husband would be coding,
Yeah.
like in the dining room or something, and working on a project, trying to make a web page for one of these scandalous sites. You know?
Yeah.
And she'd get a call, and she was transgendered.
Okay.
Although she preferred at that point in time, she called herself a she-male.
Okay.
And she really loved it.
Yeah.
And that's how she billed herself out.
Yeah.
And she would like have to drop everything and like go take these calls. And I love a story.
Yeah.
And sex is really cool
And very interesting.
and very interesting, and it's and exciting. And something that everybody should talk about. And my work had always been somewhat erotic because I always found the erotic is very political.
Right. Yeah.
And she said, one day she said, my receptionist bailed on me. They quit. You have such a beautiful voice.
You do have a nice voice.
Thank you. You have such a beautiful voice. You're always asking me a bajillion questions. Come just do me this favor and just answer phones until I can get somebody else.
Yeah. I'm going to interject. I'm a phone sex operator. And it's very interesting to hear you talk because that's how I got interested in being a phone sex operator. Is I'm super interested in people's stories and I ask a million questions, which is also why I'm a podcaster. It's the same skill.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because there's so many things that people will like tell you in
And oh boy, will they tell you.
Yeah. And if you're curious, if you're a curious
Amazing
person,
detail.
it's very interesting.
Yeah, I actually thought that too in reading the book, and I don't want to sidetrack our story too much, but I was actually kind of found it remarkable how much, at least from what I got out of reading, how much your experience as a receptionist seemed to parallel a lot of the experiences that phone sex operators had. It seems like people, that it wasn't just very matter-of-fact calls, but that people were also engaging in conversations with you that you had to navigate the boundaries of, and there was a give and take of people trying to get details and share their fantasies, and that all of that negotiating that phone sex operators do. And I thought that was really interesting because I didn't kind of have insight into that before
I think some of it was trying to get the phone sex for free.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And part of that job was about how do I make them come into the shop.
Right.
Because
that's the problem with
that's
Twitter
not
right
my
now
job.
for us.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
It's a societal thing. As a Black woman, I experienced that with my Blackness a lot too. People private messaging me like the intimate details of how they're working through some current race issue.
Yeah. Yeah.
And like, what do you think? And talk to me about and I'm like, just over here trying to live my best life, Might want to go to a consciousness raising group.
Yeah, it's a lot of emotional labor that's expected out of you. Yeah.
When you're on the outside of the mainstream.
Yeah.
Or what's perceived as the mainstream.
Right.
People have an expectation that they can benefit from your emotional labor.
Yeah.
Right.
Or they're, again, that ownership or domination and control. They feel entitled to receive that labor because you're less than they are.
Right.
You are for their service.
Right.
And again, and then that's where the whole capitalism comes into play is you exist to serve and please.
Right. Right.
We've been reading a lot of Goffman lately, who is like the theorist who kind of like coined the term stigma. I don't know if he coined the term stigma, but really like elaborated the term stigma. One of the things that Goffman said about stigma is that it makes people approachable in ways that people who don't bear stigma aren't approachable. It kind of takes away any expectation of privacy that people feel like they can just jump in. I don't know. I've been just wrestling with that a lot, like thinking about that a lot more since I kind of reread that. That
makes a lot of sense to me because, trans folks will often talk about how people want to ask them about their genitals in ways that nobody does for
thinks
cis,
it's appropriate
cis people.
to ask a cis people. And people will ask sex workers about like all the intimate details of, their sex life.
Their private sex life.
Exactly.
Too,
Private
and
sex
stuff.
life, right.
Yeah.
Right. Or, anything. And their bodies. And you're like, dude, you have to pay me for that. like my life isn't just a peep show for you, right?
What were the experiences like for you working there?
It was a very congenial environment because the women, and I always have to remember, we all called each girls. We really stripped ourselves of our power in that way.
Yeah.
Right? And I keep thinking the girls.
That's what cam girls do too. And that's interesting to me. I was trained as a feminist philosopher, and it was like really difficult for me to hear grown women talk about themselves and their colleagues as girls.
Unless it's a reclaiming of the innocence stolen.
Yeah.
Like, for example, with Black women, we call each other girls a lot.
Yeah.
And I think we go, oh, girl, because we're reclaiming that innocence that has been stolen.
Oh, that's so interesting.
Yeah.
But I think again, that's not the context.
And it's also different when like sex workers call each other that versus when like a client calls.
Oh, yeah.
You know, and so that's complicated too. And you know, how much of it is performed for the client, how much of it is just internal to the community. And I'm never quite sure. I mean, we go to a lot of conventions and people definitely refer to each other as girls, you know, outside of the gaze of clients, but also that's maybe just habit. So it's hard to say, you know.
Sitting there, those are like the deep questions you have while you're waiting
Yeah.
for some guy
Yeah.
who is not vibrating at the highest frequency with their spouse
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
to call to deliver things that a spouse is perfectly able to deliver unto you if you had open channels of communication.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting, though, because I feel like there was a long time in which I felt that, where I thought that it was sad to me that they didn't talk to their spouses about things. But then I stepped back from that and I'm like, you know what? They don't want that from their spouse. Like there are some things that people don't want from their primary partner, or they don't want to have it in between their like particular relationship. And I think there should be space for that too.
Thank you. This is a great wrestling match in my head. So I'm going to receive that with such gratitude from you.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that.
I think it's been a wrestling match in your head too. I've seen you go back and forth on this stuff a lot.
Yeah, I think because the kind of relationship that I want is one that is very open, where lines of communication are open. So I think that I spent time like projecting like that onto other people. Like, don't you want that? Don't you want to talk to her about that instead of me? And then I was like, wait, no, not everybody wants that. Not everybody's partner is one that can like take up things. I've also had a lot of clients who've said to me, my partner is very game to do whatever I want. And that's why I don't want to ask her, because I know it's something that she doesn't want. And I know that because she loves me, she'll do it anyway. And I just don't want that. And there's a lot of respect there too.
Yeah, that's a lot of respect.
Yeah, that you actually are resonating in a way that you know your partner well enough to know, if I request something, it will happen, but do I want that to happen? Because what is the implications of that for the other person?
Right.
I was going to say, I think we probably set the scene fairly well now. We hopefully brought the listeners into the space of the massage parlor, or the Splooge Factory, as you call it.
I mean, I figured, like, what was the product?
Yeah. Yeah.
I had to call it something.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why when I was working there, that's what I called it. Like, where you going? I'm going down to the Splooge Factory.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I totally got that out of reading the book. What I appreciated is that it was pretty clear that you were just drawing upon the language that you were actually using in the moment. But yeah, I thought maybe it might be a good time to jump into doing some readings.
Yeah.
Let's see what we've got.
Your book is a collection of poetry that you wrote from the perspective of different people that you worked with?
Yes.
Right? Yeah.
In the book, I write in the voices of different women. And stay often true, you can't always be all the way true. So
Sure.
if people are thinking that I'm like taking the whole story and the whole person,
Yeah.
you have to write outside of that. So
Sure.
although the voice closest to my own is Candy.
Okay.
And she's the receptionist.
Okay.
And there was another Black woman there who did actually go by the name Ebony. And I kept that because one, it's a pseudonym.
Yeah.
But two, it is that cliche word you always encounter when you're looking at Black women in sex work. It's Ebony this and Ebony that and Ebony. And so it's just this magical code word for dark-skinned Black girl.
Right.
So that's why I kept Ebony's pseudonym.
Sure.
Because there are probably 50,000 Ebonies out there doing sex work.
I mean, it's a genre.
It is a whole genre. I have a poem about that. And there was another blonde woman, Vanessa. Yeah, she has a whole arc of her own. But this was the call that actually really made me start thinking I wanted to investigate this artistically. It never in... And I have such a rich imagination. I mean, my imagination is, if I'm a wealthy woman.
Yeah.
If we're banking imagination, I'm the billionaire.
Yeah.
And never would I have anticipated this.
Okay.
Behind his back, Candy calls him Sambo. The first time he called, he wanted to know if we accept Black clients. Of course, we are an equal opportunity Splooge Factory. Do we have a blonde to dominate him? Redhead, blonde, blue, black, brunette, whatever. I smack gum in his ear. When he shuffles in, I appraise him as if being a sister gives me the right to criticize his fantasies. That's the problem with Black women, always using men's minds like trampolines. That's why he comes here, to see white women. They don't judge him. The next time he wants the blonde to call him nigger. Well, okay, but racism costs extra. Vanessa must say nigger like she really means it. After 7 weekly visits, he wants only her. But this time, she must piss on him as she screams nigger, riding crops his back. At this point, I give him a web address for the KKK. It won't cost $200. He'll save some money. Maybe get off.
How do you make sense of that? What was that experience for you like to know what he was coming in for?
It is easy to view how deep the brainwashing of white supremacy goes. To recognize it and confront it is you think you're doing a good job until you realize how insidiously it is woven into every breath we breathe in America.
Yeah.
And I had intellectualized that.
Yeah.
And I had to do my own grappling with my own internalized oppression. And interestingly enough, you know, like the character Ebony is doing her own thing on that too. So that slave mentality, when people talk about a slave mentality, don't really realize how instilled that. It's almost like an ancestral thing.
Yeah.
And so to have it in my face so fully was a shock. You know, we all talk about trying to be conscious, and some people just aren't trying to be conscious. Some people are just trying to like get over, make a butt, and get by. Some people just want the very commodified king dream.
Yeah.
Where it's really just that one paragraph from the speech and nothing more.
Right. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And cool, right? Although uncool. I came to the Splooge Factory pretty wide open.
Yeah.
And I mean, I remember when I was in college, one of the biggest books that we were all yammering about was Coming to Power, which was this incredible first book about lesbian feminist BDSM and the examination of power and politics and sexuality and using BDSM as a way of examining power in relationships.
Because there's a lot of ways in which people talk about eroticizing trauma, too. And that can be like generational trauma or like cultural trauma or like making visible on the body the sort of internalized feelings that one has. And there's a certain way in which I can make sense of that. I know that as a white person, I can't participate in that. I know that there are sex workers who do. I just can't. I feel like even if it's somebody's desire, I'm like, I can't participate in that. But there's also a way in which I understand it.
Yeah. And so but to see it so commodified that he could come in and do this without any kind of self-reflection or self-examination.
Although maybe the commodification was a way of experiencing that outside of his...
Or owning it.
Or putting some sort of boundary on it that made it kind of a safe space.
It's hard to navigate.
It is hard to navigate.
And on one hand, that's something he really needs to explore.
Yeah.
That's why he comes here, right?
Right, yeah.
I don't think a majority of Black women would be able to hold that space with him and help him heal that trauma.
Right, yeah.
And examine it.
Yeah.
And get inside of it and roll around in it like pigs in shit.
Yeah.
You know? So, again, that higher vibration and sometimes that it's not there. Because that is...
Or sometimes it needs to be with someone who's not so close.
Not so close. Or if this work taught me nothing else, is to try to step back a little bit and look at all the angles. So to try to be in as much of a place of non-judgment as I could manage to be, and yet recognize that I do have very clear and distinct bias.
Right.
And that everybody does. And
and boundaries. And I think that's actually one of the things that you learn in sex work, too, is how to assert, like, what you can do and what you can't do.
Yes. And there is so much to learn.
Yeah.
That's something we were, talking about a little bit earlier is we have yet to fully realize as a society, American or not, how much there is to learn from people who work in this industry.
Yeah.
Longer than I worked in this industry.
Right. Yeah.
There is a level of self-scrutiny, self-examination that is so necessary to be healthy.
Yeah.
And sane.
Right. Well,
and do this work.
There's so many things that you have to confront in the work that other people aren't confronting.
All the time.
I think it's really complicated, too. I mean, when you're talking about racism, when you're talking about coping with traumas or repressed traumas, I mean, I think there are people who are doing that well or addressing those issues reflexively and productively in the context of sex work. And then there are people who aren't.
Right.
And I think it's really hard. It's hard to universalize that. I think it's just one of those things that when it's done well, it can be good and productive. And when it's done poorly, it can be destructive. And I think it's hard. I think it's just very contextual.
And that's why the work is hard, right? Is like figuring out how to negotiate all of that.
Right. And I mean, I also understand like your position of like not wanting to touch race play because I think the cost of doing it poorly is really, really high. But I just feel like it's complicated.
Also, I mean, I think not wanting to do, as a white woman, not wanting to do race play is also, I think, a way of, at some point, we're just going to have to just start saying no to white supremacy. Just to each other.
Yeah.
Wherever it shows up. Even in the context of play or self-examination.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we're going to have to start looking at what is actually going on. What is...
Yeah, and I should say, too, I have much stronger opinions about that when it's white men. The white men who want to have their cuckold fantasies with BBCs more so than people who are examining their own trauma. Right. I think those are different things. Because I think one, like, upholds white supremacy and one is trying to, like, work through it.
I liked what you said about how some things really are about assertion of white supremacy and patriarchy.
Right.
And some things are, in this very strange way, attempting to, or striving, or grabbing onto anything that says this kind of trauma lives within my soul.
Yeah, right.
And I need to figure out, I need to do something with it.
Yeah.
And
or face it and feel it.
Feel it, face it.
Or have somebody witness it.
Yeah.
I think that there's probably that too. I feel it within my soul, and I want a witness to that, somebody to know what I feel.
Yeah.
Which to me feels very different than white people.
Eroticizing the subordination of someone else.
Right. Yeah, that's not the same.
You know, it's funny you mentioned about the married cuckolding men. And so there's a character, Pansy.
Okay.
And Pansy's white. And I always view Pansy, even though I don't ever really describe her, but I think the poems kind of indicate that Pansy is kind of white and perky. And
yeah.
And she was the woman who did a lot of like the wrestling work.
Okay.
And
Yeah.
Boy, I didn't know then anything is a fetish. Like,
I think the wrestling stuff is really
Anything.
interesting. We've been like talking about this recently. I am amazed how like big of a market there is for this.
it's huge.
We interviewed someone who does this sort of work, and in her bio, she had me read that she wrestles mediocre white men into submission. That's her job title.
Yeah. So this poem is not about Pansy and her wrestling work, in case our listening audience is hoping to hear about Pansy wrestling.
That's just a teaser for another time.
Buy the book.
And so the poem's called simply Pansy with Bill. No single hint or clue. Immaculately tailored, upright navy blue, banker solid. I know his children from his wallet, and tender smiles. See him toss tickle round and round the island kitchen, 2 blondes, a boy and a girl in matching LL Bean, laughing. Every afternoon I see his wife. We can afford to shop in the same places, pinch-faced, prim. She has earned her tight ass and bears the sweaty weight of beauty like a trophy. Talbot's scarf knotted just so, the way I do it, around his wrists and ankles, after pleasantries and cash, but before the whip makes him sob Mercy, his daughter's name.
Wow.
Is that kind of what you were referring to?
Yeah, it's interesting to hear the poems read because it's much more visceral, like the experience is more visceral. That sort of interaction between the sex worker and the wife is really interesting, and the parallels there.
And the thing about having a regular, and again, those boundaries,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. And her knowing about his family. And I think that people outside the industry don't recognize like how strong those relationships are. Somebody, a client of a dominatrix, actually was talking to me recently, and he actually said, I really think that you should focus on emotional relationships between clients and their sex workers. And I was like, no, that is something we're really interested in doing. And he's like, because I don't know how far to take it. Like he was saying, he doesn't know how to handle his like attachment that he has to his regular, who happens to be a friend of ours, and it was interesting to hear him say that. And part of the conflict for him is he's like, I'm in a very loving and not even sexless marriage. That's not what it's about. It's something different.
Right.
And I don't feel like I'm missing anything. And I think there's something that's confusing to him that he then also has this like very strong attachment. And he's like, it's weird how many emotions you can have in transactional relationships.
Well, but then again, people don't even think about talking about this issue with a psychological therapist, with a psychologist or a psychiatrist.
Right.
It is assumed that there is an emotional attachment for which you are paying money.
Right.
And it's legitimized and it's sanctioned.
It's theorized.
It's prescribed sometimes by judges and courts.
Yeah.
It has all the blessings because it's serving this healing purpose or it's serving this need in a person's life, and we don't afford that
Right.
or recognize that or even discuss that sometimes these are more than just guys who walk in.
Right. Yeah. And I think that that's something that we've been talking a lot about in demystifying sex work, is that a lot of the rhetoric around sex work is that it's guys that just come in. They're a bunch of randos. Sex work just, sex workers just deal with tons of random creeps. Like that's the message that like popular media sends, and not that these are people that these are people that, are in your lives or in your neighborhoods or in your social milieu or in all sorts of things, and that there's overlap.
Right. And I mean, some of that stuff does, of course, happen in like sex tourism, and some element of sex work is dealing with those randos. Mm-hmm. But to only focus on that misses this huge other story. And those more regular relationships are the core of many, if not most, sex workers' work and income and experience. Right. And that just so often gets erased in the conversation. It's like we should be able to talk about both. I mean, it doesn't have to be one or the other. We can talk about the randos, but you have to also be able to talk about the regulars and like paint the full picture.
I thought
and
it was
also, there is a hierarchy in essence in the sex work community, and
a horarchy, we like to call it.
A horarchy?
Yeah.
Yeah? That's cool.
That's a thing, yeah.
And so, I mean, I think I'm glad you brought that up also about sex tourism in other countries and the other ways in which sex work can be dehumanizing, can be.
Exploitative or,
Yes.
What did you learn? So this is kind of a more meta question, but how did you working there and working with the women who work there change your attitude like towards sex workers? Or what did you learn from them that you wouldn't have known had you not been in such like close proximity?
What did I learn from them?
Yeah. I mean, did it change your feeling about sex work or about sex workers or about who does that sort of work?
No.
Okay.
Yeah,
Tell me why.
As a performance poet, as I'd said, a lot of my earlier work had been very erotic in nature.
Yeah.
And I've always been a very sex positive person.
Yeah.
And so I've always looked at it almost even historically.
Yeah.
As a method of as a guaranteed method for entrepreneurship.
Right.
For women.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I was able to really, I'm like behind it in terms of financial equity.
Yeah.
And some of the women who worked there some of the women who worked there went to Carnegie Mellon University.
Yeah.
Paid for their education.
Right.
Rock on.
Yeah.
Don't be saddled by student loan debt.
Yeah.
Right? And of course, some, not all. It's never everybody.
Right.
Ever.
Yeah.
You cannot say one thing in the world that is inclusive of everybody. So I was interested, but I think, when Michelle was like telling me all those things, I was more interested that it wasn't actual sex work. Sex work, in quotation marks.
Right.
That it was most elaborate pretend game.
Yeah.
It was theater.
Yeah.
It was performance art. I was like, wow, this is like big money for performance art. And so that was that something I learned?
Yeah.
That was different?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And the power of assuming a character.
Yeah.
And the power of language. I knew all these things.
Yeah.
I never. So again, something that surprised me is that these women weren't all artists. Like they're artists.
Yeah. They just didn't identify
but
like
they
that.
Don't identify as artists.
Yeah. Right.
They wanted to go on and have different kinds of careers. And I'm like, why? You're an Oscar award-winning dominatrix.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was interesting too. I mean, to just kind of bring it back to what we were talking a little earlier about how being a receptionist wasn't just setting dates and taking phone calls. I mean, it was taking phone calls, but that there was a sort of performative aspect to that, and even elements of sex work in that. And I just thought that was interesting.
Weeding out the foot fetishes. That was it. I mean,
they didn't take foot fetishes at the...
No, they did.
Oh, you just had to find them?
But there were always the guy who wanted to come in for the nude massage, but he really had a foot fetish.
Yeah.
And that was extra, you know? Because the minute you move from, I'm just going to give you a little rub on and, send you on your merry way, but the minute it starts getting all about like a fetish, that's highly specialized work. It involves more imaginative, more intellectual and emotional labor.
Right.
So you need to compensate them accordingly.
Right.
You can't just slide in here with your foot fetish and pay for nudie massage.
So you kind of had to talk people through their fantasies then to kind of pinpoint what they actually wanted.
Yeah, and could we service that?
Yeah. That's all really interesting.
And like, I'm going to try to find the poem really quick because there is a poem. This one is Candy explains funk takes time, which is money. He began ordinary, cheap, nude massage, $75 per half hour. Over the phone line, I fish for fetishes. Gut his desire was affordable until feet crept into his booking requirement. Broad, flat workers' feet, unpainted, toes with jam. A cultivated delicacy. Perfect bodies have a shorter shelf life. Stink on feet must be tended. Hot house roses bred for smell.
I had a client once who was really into dusty feet.
Who knew?
Dusty. That specifically. Like, do you walk around on dust?
Yes. Who
It's like,
knew?
where would I
like
get this
workers'
dust?
feet. Like, what is that?
Yeah, it's so specific.
So very specific. Dusty feet.
Yeah, like you walk around in all that dust, don't you, Mommy? Huh? what dust?
My house is immaculate. Oh, what a buzzkill.
Yeah, that's great. I think that there are so many people who work in this industry who would resonate with that.
Totally.
Where can people find your book?
Okay, the book is available on, right now, immediately. There's a 20% off pre-sale order at www.frayededgepress.com.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's like a slash splooge.
Okay.
And then it's also, you can search it up on Amazon.
Awesome.
So you can buy it from the independent publisher directly.
Take note.
Or you could get it on Amazon.
Great. All right. Thanks so much. Is there other places that you want to direct people if they're interested in your poetry or your other work or your art?
You can follow me on Facebook at Christina Springer, artist.
Okay.
And I, from time to time, but not often, tweet, and I'm at CM Springer.
Okay.
And I do have a website, which is going to be gorgeous in like 2 weeks.
Okay.
And that is www.christinaspringer.com.
Great. Thanks so much. And thanks for joining us. It was fun to talk to you about your project.
Thank you so much for having me. This was a gorgeous conversation. And you guys are such lovely people.
Thanks.
And this is the best. I hope every interview after this is like this. Because I just feel really honored to be able to be in a relatable space with people who are with this community, with this work, with the honor that these women deserve, and these women whose stories I tried to tell.
Thank you for joining us for yet another episode of the Peep Show podcast. I'm PJ Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at PeachSage.
And I'm Jessie Sage, and you can find me on Twitter at sapiotextual or at jessiesage.com.
We would like to remind you that we have a Patreon account and would appreciate your support. Please visit patreon.com/peepshowpodcast. Our music is courtesy of Joe Kennedy. The show was produced by Jessie and PJ Sage.
Signing off. Have a great week.